Bueno, pues llegamos a la recta final de la jornada con la conferencia del profesor Mathematics en el Harvey Math College de California, Francis Su, que nos va a presentar Elena Gil en nombre de todo el comité organizador. Sí que me gustaría indicaros que la conferencia va a ser en inglés, aunque posteriormente va a ser editada con subtítulos en castellano. Podéis ir haciendo vuestras aportaciones en el chat, que recogeré y traduciré para el profesor Francis Su al final de la conferencia. Muy bien, pues adelante, Elena.
Bueno, como ya os ha comentado María Jesús, Francis Su es profesor del Departamento de Matemáticas de Harvey Math College en California. Su currículum es extensísimo, ha recibido muchos premios y ha desempeñado cargos importantes como el de presidente de la Mathematical Association of America, y es director de una larga lista de tesis y ha sido invitado como conferenciante a tantos encuentros e instituciones en los últimos años que verdaderamente pues, es un privilegio que haya aceptado estar con nosotros hoy. Le hemos invitado por ser autor de todo su currículum, queremos resaltar que lo hemos invitado por ser autor del libro que da nombre a su conferencia, Mathematics for Human Flourishing. Como hemos dicho a lo largo de estas jornadas, nuestro grupo cree que creen unas matemáticas esencialmente humanas que tienen un papel central en el crecimiento y en la maduración de todo ser humano, y en unas matemáticas como paideia, de acuerdo al ideal de la Grecia clásica. El año pasado, Luigi Regoliosi, que veo que está aquí conectado, que es el presidente de la Asociación Italiana de Profesores Tocalón, que es socia del proyecto, conoció el libro y lo compartió con nosotros. Sus ideas acerca de las virtudes que las matemáticas nacidas, como él cuenta en el libro, como el profesor Su cuenta en el libro, nacidas a partir del encuentro personal con una persona especialmente vulnerable, conectan perfectamente con el trabajo que desarrollamos y por eso nos pareció una buena idea invitar. Thank you, Professor Su, for agreeing to participate in our workshop and for getting up so early in the morning. Don't forget, he is in California and I think it's 4 a.m., no, for you. Well, for getting up so early in the morning to share your time with us. In our current work with children, especially with those with an intellectual disabilities, we discover each day that how mathematics has the power to make them flourish as human beings. The language we use is important, and the meaningful words you have chosen in your book, freedom, community, justice, have been inspiring for us. In the materialistic world we live, it's a pleasure to read such soulful and spiritual words, and we hope we will enjoy today listening together to you.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias. Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Espero que todos ustedes estén muy bien. Es un gusto estar aquí con ustedes por Zoom. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad de hablar. Solo hablo un poco de español, así que haré mis comentarios en inglés. What is the purpose of a math education? Do we do it to build skills, to gain credentials, to get a good job? Is that all that we learn mathematics for? Do we do it to compare ourselves to others? Or is it something more? Should it be something more? And whom do we believe has potential? I really like this quote by Simone Weil. Every being cries out silently to be read differently. Consider this work of art by one of your own, Salvador Dali, called Crucifixion, Corpus Hypercubus. What do you notice about the painting? Perhaps you've seen it many times. What do you wonder? And why does artwork like this draw us in? Well, it's because we see it and we engage with it, because we all have basic human desires. It's beautiful and we desire beauty. It cries out for explanation. What are those cubes doing there? Why are they formed in the shape of a cross? Why is this a hypercube? It cries out for explanation because we seek to understand its meaning. It's captivating and we desire to explore it. It causes us to wonder, to ask questions, to seek its truth. And why don't we approach mathematics the same way that we approach art? Every being cries out silently to be read differently. Several years ago, I received this letter out of the blue from an inmate in a federal prison. His name is Christopher Jackson. He's been in prison since he was a teenager. He got involved in drugs in high school. He never finished, was involved in a series of armed robberies, and that landed him in prison with a 32-year sentence. And so when you think of who does mathematics, would you think of Christopher? And yet he wrote me this letter, and in it he said that he's always had a proclivity for mathematics, but being in a very early stage of youth and living in some adverse circumstances, he said he never came to understand the true meaning and benefit of pursuing an education. When you think of who does mathematics, would you think of Christopher? And yet he's inspired me to believe even more fully that math has something to offer everyone. Every being cries out silently to be read differently. This is Simone Weil. Those were her words. She's a well-known French religious mystic, a philosopher, probably less well-known as the younger sister of André Weil, one of history's most famous number theorists. And for Simone, to read someone means to interpret or make a judgment about them. She's saying every being cries out silently to be judged differently. And I sometimes wonder if she were crying out about herself because she too loved, participated in mathematics, but she was always comparing herself to her brother. She said this, at 14, I fell into one of those fits of bottomless despair that come with adolescence, and I seriously thought of dying because of the mediocrity of my natural faculties. The exceptional gifts of my brother, who had a childhood and youth comparable to those of Pascal, brought my own inferiority to me. I didn't mind having no visible successes, but what did grieve me was the idea of being excluded from that transcendent kingdom to which only the truly great have access and wherein truth abides. I preferred to die rather than live without that truth. Now we know that Simone actually loved math because she used math in her philosophical writings, and you'll find her in photos like this with her brother. This is a group of French mathematicians known as Bourbaki. Notice that she's here at left, poring over some notes. Her brother Andre is waving the bell. And I sometimes wonder when I look at this picture what she felt like being the lone woman in this group of men. And I wonder what her relationship to math would be like if she weren't always in her brother's shadow. Every being cries out silently to be read differently. Now, you might look at me and think, gosh, he's a math professor. Maybe he's never struggled in math. But I had my share of obstacles. I grew up in a small rural area of Texas with limited opportunities. I did have several supportive teachers who encouraged me in high school and at university. And I managed to get admitted to Harvard for my PhD, but I felt out of place there because I, unlike the others, did not come from an Ivy League school, and I didn't have a whole set of graduate courses before I entered. And I felt like Simone Weil, standing next to future Andres, thinking I would never be able to flourish if I were not like them. And one professor even told me that I didn't have what it takes to be a successful mathematician. Why do we make judgments about people like that? Why do we feel so compelled to discourage rather than encourage? That remark forced me to ask the question, why was I even doing mathematics? And that's the question all of us should ask. Why do mathematics? Why is Christopher sitting in a prison cell studying calculus that he won't use as a free man, at least for another 20 years? Why was Simone so captivated by transcendent mathematical truths? Why should anybody persist in doing math when others are telling her in subtle and maybe not so subtle ways that she doesn't belong? And society is asking what its relationship to math should be. Is math only a tool to make you, quote, college and career ready, or to just so that you can achieve some other goal in life? Or is math unnecessary for most of us and only for the elite few? Why study math if you'll never use what you're learning? That's a question we've all heard if we're teachers. We've all asked that question. And of course, the reason these questions arise is because math is often just seen as a means to an end, a tool that you're going to use sometime in the future rather than a pursuit that serves you well right now. When kids ask, when will I ever use this? They're really asking, when will I ever value this? They're equating value with utility because they haven't been told that they can value anything more. And yet in a prison, Christopher has never asked, when will I ever use this? Right? He's poring over textbooks, learning math in hopeful anticipation of its own intrinsic rewards. So if you ask me, why do mathematics? I would say this: it's because mathematics helps people flourish. And when I say human flourishing, I'm referring to a wholeness, a certain wholeness of being and of doing, of realizing one's potential and helping others to do the same, of acting with honor and treating others with dignity, of living with integrity, even in challenging circumstances. And so it's not just the same as happiness. It's not just a state of mind. The well-lived life is a life of human flourishing. The Greeks had a word for this, eudaimonia, which they viewed as an overarching good in life. There's a similar word in Hebrew, shalom, which is often a greeting people use, sometimes translated peace, but the word to wish somebody shalom is to wish that they would flourish and live well. Arabic has a similar word, salam. And a basic question we should all ask is, how do you achieve human flourishing? What's the well-lived life? Aristotle would say that flourishing comes through the exercise of virtue. And virtue you can think of as excellence of character that leads to excellence of conduct. So it includes more than just moral virtue. For instance, courage, wisdom, persistence, creativity. These are all virtues. And what I hope to convince you of is that the practice of mathematics actually cultivates virtues that help people flourish. I think you saw that in the talk, the last talk that Elena gave. These virtues serve you well no matter what you do in life. And the movement towards virtues happens because we're all human beings and we have basic human desires. Deseo humano básico. And these desires can draw us all to do mathematics. So I want to talk about several basic human desires today, just a few, and how math can meet these desires. For instance, beauty, belleza. Seeing something beautiful causes us to reflect, right? Like this figure in this illustration, standing before a mathematical pattern. Beauty causes us to be quiet, to observe, to notice, to wonder. And we stand in awe at a beautiful painting and search for its meaning. The same thing happens in math. You see a striking pattern governed by math laws, and it causes you to stop, to reflect, to ask why. And why takes you from a certain kind of sensory beauty, where you might first encounter beautiful patterns, to wondrous beauty, the beauty of ideas. And from ideas, you begin to see an insightful beauty, the beauty of reasoning, which is a unique form of beauty found in math. The demonstrations of truths themselves can be awe-inspiring. We even have a word for this. We say that an idea is elegant. And the deepest form of beauty is what you might call transcendent beauty, which happens when you see the same beautiful idea pop up everywhere. It's like the universe is speaking to you. And that kind of beauty can feel sublime, almost divine. And pursuing math for beauty cultivates in us virtues, like the virtue of reflection. When you contemplate beautiful ideas, just like you contemplate a beautiful forest, it leads to joyful gratitude and transcendent awe. And when we experience beauty from seeing a beautiful idea everywhere, we build in us, this is one of the most important virtues, I think, of mathematics education. We build in us habits of generalization because we begin to expect patterns, overarching patterns everywhere. So when I learn a new idea in math, I often ask, what gives this idea its power? What's the underlying principle? How does it apply in another situation? And such habits carry over to other areas of my life. When I'm cooking a stir fry and I learn a new recipe, I often ask, what principles does this recipe teach me? Because you know what? I don't want to have to memorize recipes. So I learned that, if you're putting in garlic, you put it in first, right? So that the oil can soak up the aroma of the garlic. That's a general principle. And this habit of looking for general cooking principles or math principles allows you to improvise new delights. And so when employers are looking to hire a math student, they're not looking to hire somebody who knows how to factor a quadratic. They're looking to hire somebody who has virtues like the ability to improvise and to innovate using mathematical ideas. And so for all teachers, we should ask, how can we encourage the teaching of beauty? One is to look for patterns everywhere, in art, in rhythm, in music and culture. Call out elegant ideas wherever you see them, interesting applications of math, like this tiling of this plaza. Make space for reflection in your teaching rather than just assigning problems. Ask your students to reflect. What striking patterns do you see in the world around you? Consider one idea from this course that you found beautiful and explain why it's beautiful to you. I guarantee if you do this, you will experience joy for the first time in your grading to listen to the reflections of your students. I have this blog post called 7 Exam Questions for a Pandemic. You can Google it and look it up if you want to find some examples of reflections that I've used in my courses. I also have a website called Math Fun Facts, where I've gathered together, I think, things that I think are beautiful. And as teachers, it's a good idea for you to cultivate and collect beautiful ideas so that you can use them in your teaching. Here's another deseo humano básico, exploración. This is a basic human desire. We love to explore. It's a sign of human flourishing. Flourishing societies spend resources to go do some exploration, such as looking at the rings of Saturn. And when you engage in exploration, what are you doing? You're captivated by mystery. You're motivated by questions. You're not discouraged if you have a setback, right? Exploration, this is what characterizes exploration. And mathematical exploration is very much like space exploration, right? But of a different kind of space, a space of ideas. So you don't know what you'll find when you start. You're hoping to solve mysteries, right? And you make discoveries from a distance, just like in space, because the ideas themselves aren't physical. You're exploring things with your mind. And you don't need a lot of resources except your mind to be a math explorer. And so you can explore math from anywhere. You can have an adventure from anywhere, a prison, a small rural town, or some far-flung corner of the earth. And exploration cultivates in us virtues like imagination and creativity. To solve problems, you have to dream up new possibilities. And that's what happens when people innovate, like creating a smartphone or things that go into that. It's visualizing patterns and envisioning the hidden structures of mathematics under everything that we see. And here's a big one, a big virtue of mathematics, the expectation of enchantment, right? Explorers are excited by the thrill of finding things that are weird and wonderful, right? That's why we go on hikes through unfamiliar terrain, right? In math, it's the same way. If you take a fractal Menger sponge with cubes cut out all over and you slice it diagonally and, oh my gosh, you find hexagonal stars, you're enchanted, you're surprised, right? And so we learn to expect enchantment around every corner. And that's what keeps people coming back for math, right? People don't come back to math because they want to do lots and lots of problems. I mean, it's good to practice, certainly, but that's not what keeps people coming back. What keeps people coming back is interesting problems, enchanting ideas. I mean, it shouldn't surprise us then that in a pandemic, the sales of puzzles have gone through the roof. Why? Because mathematical thinking is a form of escape, enchantment. You'll be pleased to know that Christopher Jackson and I have been working on a research problem together that's now going to be published in the American Mathematical Monthly during the pandemic with a group of other mathematicians. And so we have to ask ourselves, if we're teachers, and we're all teachers, by the way, even if you're not a teacher, we all teach math by the way we communicate attitudes about who does math. If you're teaching your kids, or you're teaching your coaching your nephew, how do you make your classroom a place of exploration? How do you train your students to expect enchantment around every corner? Right? One way is to change dull problems to exploratory problems. Instead of asking people to compute an area, ask your students to create two rectangles so that the first has a bigger perimeter and the second has a bigger area. That's more exploratory. It's a way more interesting problem. And you actually learn something about the relationship between perimeter and area. Ask your students to strategize. What happens if this or that happens? Use open-ended questions. Showcase surprising, enchanting ideas. I like to tell my students in this class, good questions are better than good answers. I explicitly reward students for asking good questions. I like to tell my students, I'm going to train you to be a math explorer, to think, to reason, to solve problems you've never seen before. Here's another basic human desire, the desire to play. Now, what characterizes play, if you think about it? Beach play, word play, game play. Well, there's an interplay between structure and freedom. There's investigation. There's no great stake in the outcome. There's surprise, and you're using your imagination, because mathematics makes the mind its playground. And what does play look in mathematics do for us? It builds in us virtues like hopefulness and concentration. When you sit with a puzzle long enough, you are exercising hope that you'll eventually solve it. And I wouldn't underestimate that. This is part of why it's important to help kids learn to struggle, right? Because it builds in them hopefulness. Math play builds the ability to change perspective, just like in gameplay, when you analyze a situation from multiple points of view and imagine the possibilities. Math play builds in us perseverance, just as weekly soccer practices build up muscles that make us stronger for the next game. Weekly math investigations make us more fit to solve the next problem, whatever that is, even if we don't solve the current problem, even if we don't win that soccer game. Play is part of human flourishing. So how can you cultivate a spirit of play in doing math? How do you make it a playful sport and not a performance sport? Well, I de-emphasize grades as just a measure of progress, not a measure of your mathematical promise. I prioritize questions, investigations, surprise, imagination. I value process, not just outcome. What have you learned in this class about the process of doing or creating mathematics? There's another great question to ask your students and see what they say. Here's another basic human desire, the desire for justice. All of us have this desire to be treated fairly. And that doesn't often happen in a math class. I'll just give you an example from my own experience going to Chinese restaurants and not being able to speak Chinese. I often don't get what they call the secret menu because they think that I'm not interested in Chinese food. And
Ha ocurrido algo, ¿no, María Jesús?
Y parece que se ha desconectado. Vamos a esperar un poquito para ver si se vuelve a conectar. A ver.
¿Tenéis un teléfono para escribir?
Tengo yo un teléfono, sí, tengo un teléfono.
Dile que hemos oído hasta la justicia.
Ay, qué rabia.
A ver si es el principio del apagón mundial.
No pasa nada, son gajes de la directa, no pasa nada. Enseguida.
Ya vuelve.
Ya está.
Ya está, ya.
¿Sí? Vale. Ya está.
María Jesús, ¿me puedes recordar, María Jesús, dónde nos hemos quedado, hasta dónde hemos oído?
Francis, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We lost you in the part related to justice.
Oh, yes. My computer it's not my internet. It's probably my computer for some reason has just completely zonked out.
Don't worry.
I think I'll finish my comments here and wait for my computer to potentially reboot. But I think I was just talking about how it is that people in math classes don't get treated the same sometimes, and I have that experience in Chinese restaurants, ironically.
Yeah, we've heard about the secret menu.
Yeah.
The secret
seen the menu.
Yes, exactly. So the secret menu is basically a restaurant. It basically happens in Chinese restaurants where if you're Chinese and you speak Chinese, you get a completely different menu than other people do. And so the weird thing is that you go to a restaurant and people side by side are having completely different experiences. And what happened when that, for me, what that highlighted for me was this is actually something that happens in a math class as well, right? You have some students who are encouraged to do math, and you have some students who are discouraged from doing math. And so how do we ensure that everybody actually has a chance to see the secret mathematical menu? Whom do we encourage and whom do we discourage? We have to think carefully about how we teach in an inclusive way. The last basic human desire that I wanted to talk about is love. This is one that you might not associate with mathematics, but it's hugely important. It's love is the center of every virtue. Love is the most important component of the teaching relationship between a teacher and a student. And love is what we do when we exercise when we choose to believe that everybody can flourish in mathematics, because all of us deep down inside are math people, right? We all have basic human desires. We all have the capacity to explore, to play. We have the capacity to enjoy mathematics. And so who are we going to believe has potential? Who are we going to love? Who are we going to read differently? Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to field questions or to have a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we are open to questions. You can do it by the chat, or even you can do it in English directly talking, and I can translate also you that do it in Spanish.
So perhaps I can make a question. Thank you very much for your very nice talk. And it is very meaningful after all we have listened to and watched this morning from Zaragoza. And I wonder, this view of mathematics was very common. I am speaking from Rome in Italy. It was so common among humanists in Renaissance Italy. They were always quoting Plato on this and on mathematics as something that makes people who are sleeping being in life and so on. And why we have forgotten about this? Because I think that when reading your book, we feel the idea that you have deeply felt that there is a need for reminding the mathematical people, teachers and mathematicians and everybody, and also primary school teachers, they need to turn back to this classical idea.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can speculate. I mean, I think one of the reasons that math classrooms often strip away the best parts of what it means to do mathematics is because we feel compelled to assess mathematical knowledge, mathematical abilities. People often feel like, okay, how am I going to decide if someone's good at math? Well, I'll give them a bunch of problems. One of the drawbacks of that is you don't see a rich, well-rounded sense of what it means to do math. I mean, it's hard to measure virtue. It's hard to determine if someone is creative. It's hard to determine if they are persistent. It's easy to give them a bunch of problems and assign a score. And so when that happens, we've sort of we just made our jobs as teachers easier, but the problem is that sends the public a message that all that matters in doing math is getting a score. And so then we tend to rank people by hierarchies. It looks like speed often in elementary school. Kids get the idea that they have to be fast at math. When those of us who do math for a living realize
I agree completely with you. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think that's one component is we need to change the way we assess. And we need to send a different message to our students. Those students who grow up with a new, better message are going to grow up into be part of the public that experiences a change in what math and is able to communicate a change in what mathematics is. It's a set of, so if there's one takeaway from my talk, math is a set of virtues, not a set of skills.
Exactly. But excuse me, I add only something, that this is a terrible misunderstanding, because when you read people writing about assessment, they think they are doing a nice thing for people. So they are not very, very bad and people doing harm. No, they think they are going to help people for understanding a lot of mathematics, for finding a very good job or becoming a good citizen and so on. So this is a terrible misunderstanding. I hope your example, for example, from the United States and this book will be of great help.
Thank you.
Francis, there are some comments in the chat, a lot of them, because it's very interesting. I will try to pick some of them. Dear Francis, what advice would you give to someone who's struggling to overcome the fear of maths, even if he or she is already a grown-up? Is it too late to love maths? The other is, well, it's just more a comment. I firmly believe that we are all prepared to understand and therefore enjoy elementary mathematics, which is elementary but not easy.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly sympathize, because I definitely meet a lot of people all the time who've had traumatic experiences because of something people have told them. I mean, look at somebody like myself who, as a PhD student, somebody said, "You're not good enough," right? Like, if it happens to me, it happens all the time to people who haven't even gotten as far in mathematics. I think it's very hard to overcome that, but I don't think it's too late. I don't think it's ever too late. I think part of what needs to happen is for a person who's experienced math trauma to see that they're actually doing math all the time in the everyday. Like, you know, if anybody who's ever played a board game strategizes, and strategic thinking is mathematical thinking, because you have to explore what happens when, if you do this, make this move, someone else is going to make the other move, right? That's mathematical thinking. You're already doing mathematical thinking, and people play board games all the time. Nobody ever says you're not good enough to play a game, right? It's a hard question. I don't have easy answers, but that's one way, is to help people see that they're already doing what we all in this room think of as mathematics, as mathematical thinking. It's not being able to factor algebraic expressions. And that's, you know, it's a very specialized kind of skill that's useful for people who go on in science and engineering. But for the vast majority of us, factoring, even a mathematician, I don't even, you know, do factoring all the time, right? So why do people come away with the idea that math is all about algebra? I don't know.
Thanks. I think that Arantxa, maybe Arantxa, you could directly talk, or I can read your comments.
Excuse me, Francis, history of mathematics, I am a historian of maths, can give some explanations about this preeminence of algebra in the second half of the 20th century, perhaps, with Bourbaquisme. So the group of friends of Simone Weil have had a great influx on teaching.
And maybe not always a good one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe Arantxa, would you like to tell your comment, or I can read it if you want?
Okay, well, dear Francis, thank you very much for your speech. It's so nice. And I'm teaching maths at the university, and I'm fortunately able to teach in a double degree with humanistics and primary teachers. And I show to my students your YouTube video, and I already bought your book for my library and it's on the recommendations of my students. But one of the things that I feel is they are not, even though they are students for humanities, they are not able to see the link between science and especially maths with humanistic behaviors, and why maths helps you to grow up. And one of the things that I feel in all of them, that those students are students that in the secondary school they choose humanistics in front of science or maths. So when they arrive to university, all of them feel that they are not good in maths. And it's so difficult just to help them. You are able to study maths. You are able to do work and speech with maths. And it's not so easy. So can you give us some trick or something just to help them at the very beginning, because it's really hard. At the end, I'm with them 3 years. And at the end, they already believe me, but it's so hard. Yeah,
it is hard. And I think, again, I don't have easy answers, but I think one thing universities can do, but it takes a math department that actually believes in everybody's potential, is to offer courses that show people the beautiful side of math that doesn't require much background and helps build up their mathematical identity. And because the thing is that, you know, it's true, if you are a college student and you have always never had a good experience in math, and you want, it's not going to be easy. You probably will not have time in the college, you know, in your college career to come from no background and become a scientist. It's going to be hard, right? That requires years and years of preparation, because, you know, there are areas of math where you need to go, you know, one thing builds on top of the other. Okay, that's true. But that's not the same as saying a person isn't a mathematical doesn't have mathematical ability. And so I think there need to be accessible courses that get students excited about mathematics and give them the confidence that they can go on and learn stuff. And then, once you get somebody excited and you change their self-framing, they can go off and learn stuff on their own. So I would say that that's maybe not on their own, but with guidance. But the key part is changing their self-identity, changing their view of themselves, and that's going to be a course that I think it has the most chance of being effective at helping students.
Okay, thanks.
Well, Francis, as you know, we work with children with intellectual disabilities, and we have a great advantage with them because nobody, society, nor their teachers, nor their parents expect nothing of them as mathematical beings. So we have a great freedom, no? We have a great freedom to guide these children to the encounter of mathematics. And in this freedom, we have discovered a lot of things that are really true. Perhaps we can find, we have had the privilege to discover the truth of the sense of teaching mathematics to children, that it's not to find a job or to study science or to manage with the money, but it's that pleasure, that I don't know, that sense of being capable of doing things that mathematics have the power to grow in them, no? So, well, a disadvantage, the intellectual disability, turns it into an advantage, and we can learn a lot about them, no?
Yes, and I'm so inspired by the work that you all are doing. I think it highlights for us those of us who have been harmed by people in mathematics. It's because we do have this kind of idea that math is all about performance, and the more we can get away from math as performance to math as something to experience, that every human being ought to experience, should be able to experience, the better I think will be. But I love the work that you're doing, and it helps highlight that.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm inspired as you noted, by Christopher Jackson, right? Like, here's somebody that society has written off. Nobody expects anything of him. And maybe he didn't expect that of himself. And yet when he got to prison, he started reading books, and he worked his way up from algebra to calculus. And it's not like he's going to use calculus, honestly. I mean, I think he doesn't have a chance of parole. He's going to be in prison unless we find some relief for him, some way, unless laws change. He's going to be in prison until he's 50. Society's written him off, but he is the definition of flourishing right now.
In fact, we have even twisted the wonderful word performance, which means originally creating form and beauty with the body, with the voice. And then we use it in this terrible meaning, like being a machine that does the job good and quickly and so on.
Good point. Never thought of that.
¿Puedo participar?
Yes, José Ignacio, you have very interesting comments. Please, could you share?
Hi, Francis. Just also want to thank you for your talk, for your... ¿No se oye bien?
El sonoro,
No.
el sonido.
Sí.
Ahora.
¿Se oye ahora mejor?
Sí.
Hi, Francis. I just wanted to thank you for your talk, and also bring in an issue that I haven't seen, but maybe you have mentioned it in your book, which is this competitive society where, like you said, we are labeled as good or not good at math. And our performance is key in the way we are labeled. And something similar happens with, I believe, or with music. If we are not good in sports in a competitive point of view, then it's like we don't have access to sports anymore. Like we get pushed away from it. The way sports has, in a way, solved this issue is, for example, jogging, activities like that, where you're not exposed to any competition, or right, and you feel good about yourself because you're doing some kind of sport. So I wonder if there is a way to present mathematics so that everybody exercises mathematics, like jogging, like you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have a basic mental health through mathematics because you jog mathematics on a regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it happens that people don't call it math, right? It's like, puzzle solving. It's like solving the Sudoku puzzle in the New York Times, or, in one of the newspapers. People don't think of that necessarily as math, although Sudoku probably people connect to math in some way. But I think that's a really great point. I mean, music, similarly, people, yes, there are the virtuosos who will never, I'll never perform, I'll never play violin like Yo-Yo Ma. But can everybody enjoy music? I think society recognizes that you can enjoy music even if you're not going to be a performer, and that you can enjoy at least watching sport, or even participating a little bit. So it's not to the same extent. I think you're right, and there are good reasons for that. And we should take advantage of their example to see how math can be reframed. So what would be the daily exercises? What would be the jogging exercises? I think that's a good question, but I think it begins with interesting puzzles and challenging problems. There are some apps, I think, or websites, like, I don't remember one of them, brilliant.org or something, that sort of challenges you to a daily thing, whatever it is. Maybe people can think carefully about that and reframe what they're doing as mathematical.
Yeah, like you said, interesting questions make, right, like push us in a positive way. Thank you for your inspiring talk, Francis.
Thank you. Gracias.
Francis, we have another question from Mariana. Dear Francis, what characteristics make a good teacher from your own point of view? I think,
yeah, I think a good teacher needs to be a good listener. A good teacher needs to be attuned to what's going on with a student. So it's very easy for math teachers to think, I'm just here to communicate information, to just speak, but I don't think we listen enough. One of the things that I learned from these reflection exercises, which, I've been teaching for college math for 25 years, and only in the last 5 to 10 years have I started doing reflections on in a big way, on my assessments and my homework or my exams. And I'm just blown away, like, from my students answering questions. I put a question like, what do you learn in this class about the process of doing or creating mathematics? I changed the framing of my courses so that now people know that this is part of what it means that I'm looking for in this class. I'm not just looking for you to be able to solve problems. I want you to learn something about what doing and creating looks like. And I'm just blown away by the kinds of responses that I get now from my students. Listen, and this is listening, right? It's like, oh, like my students have taught me new ways of thinking about the material I've been teaching for 25 years. Why? Because they figured out, they show me, and I can assess this, they show me through these reflections that they've thought about things in a new way. Like, one of my students said to me, like, they were reflecting on the power of the definition. And they said, a definition essentially frames the conversation you're going to have with the material. I'm like, yeah, that's right. It does. Like that's, but I never thought about it that way. Another student of mine said, doing math is a lot like learning to put something together without an instruction booklet. Now, of course, everybody thinks math is all about recipes, but this student had realized like, oh no, actually math is more like being able to put that piece of IKEA furniture together without looking at the instructions, right? It's the ability to solve problems you've never seen before, to work it out, to think for yourself. And I love that. That's a beautiful framing. I learned that from my student when I listen to my student. So anyway, sorry. What do I think characteristic of good math teachers? I think that probably the biggest thing is listening and empathy. And beyond that, I guess they're all the standard things like being able to explain things well, to give students, connect to their experiences.
Let me just make a quick comment. So Luigi has written or has asked a question in the chat. He teaches students that are going to become teachers, elementary school teachers, and he says that one of the difficulties he encounters is that students want to or feel like they need to know everything about a topic before they can start teaching it. Like they need to cover all different aspects before they can actually bring it in the classroom. And you just brought that issue, like you're a college professor and you are, I don't want to say constantly, but you are on a regular basis, at least you feel like you're learning something. So, right? So you don't need to know everything. There's no way of knowing everything before you bring it into your classroom. So how do you tackle that issue, and how do you make students understand that you can start teaching math even if you don't know everything?
Yeah. I mean, I think again, that's a framing question, like in terms of framing what it is we're doing as teachers. And the more that we can help teachers see that they should be modeling for their students what it looks like to have these mathematical virtues rather than having all these mathematical skills, right? Like I may not know how to do X, Y, or Z, but do I know how to think to begin to solve, to attack a problem that I've never seen before? That's what a teacher should model and be able to model. In fact, a teacher should be able to get in front of the class and say, I won't know all the answers to the questions, but I do have an attitude, a frame of mind that helps me to begin to tackle questions I've never seen before. And that's what I want to communicate to you. That's what I want to model for you. Somehow that, I think that needs, again, it's virtues, right? And similarly, like here's a tie-in to that. Like, okay, so for those people who say math is all about getting a good job, well, think about those good jobs, the people who are hiring people with mathematical, for their mathematical training. They're not hiring students because they know how to solve factor or whatever it is, a particular problem. They're hiring people with particular virtues to solve problems they've never seen before. Like the technology jobs of today that are so hot, a lot of the math that people are doing for that is being invented as they're doing it. It's not something that they learned 20 years ago in some school. And so, we're all constantly in a state of learning. One of the things that I like to do in my class, for instance, to communicate that to my students is that, I explicitly reward students for asking questions. Sometimes in some of my classes, I've even rewarded students for admitting what they don't know rather than just admitting what they know. So like, I have this class where they work to solve problems and they present them on the board. And one of the things that I do is I actually reward them for getting up in front of the class and saying, here's a strategy that I tried that didn't work on this problem. And why do I do that? Because I want to communicate to them that that's part of doing math as well, to try something that doesn't work. And you learn something from that.
Yeah.
So I think the more we can change that framing of what it is to do math, the better. And teachers can be the first to do that.
Yeah.
There is an echo of what you are saying with the first lecture or talk in this in our conference from Eduardo Sáenz de Cabezón, and he spoke about his doctoral student in this moment and something like that. So we need courage, because we will try many paths and then some of them will not work, and we have to acknowledge and understand it deeply. This is a great connection from the beginning to the end of our conference.
Yeah.
And we go ahead.
Yeah, we want to share with you, Francis, that we not only work with children with intellectual disabilities, but our team are working actually in designing workshops for training teachers, because of course teacher is a central piece in all this conception of mathematics. And we have designed some workshops for complementing training teacher in college, and they deal with trust. They deal with each one's biography about mathematics of a student, and how to part from this biography to build trust, to be able to face these challenges that Luigi have posed, to not fear the mistake, not fear this atmosphere of play and working together that can be creating a class without having everything well controlled.
Yes, right. The teacher doesn't have to be always in charge in some sense.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
Yeah, and the same thing happens with parents as well. And we see this, right? Like the parents are like, they're resistant to new math curricula because they're afraid that their kids will ask them questions they can't answer. And so I think we need somehow to communicate to parents that they don't have to know the answers, but they can model how to think.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So, Francis, thank you very much for this absolutely inspiring conference. I would like to be here for the whole day and we can just talk in here. But maybe you need to have, I don't know, to go to bed or have a breakfast.
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you very much. We have enjoyed it a lot. Thank you for us. We will follow your inspiration.
Me too. Muchas gracias, and thank you. If it's possible, could you save the text from the chat before you close the session, so that I haven't had a chance to read the comments.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, because thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, we will.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas.
Grazie mille.
Mucho gusto.
Grazie.
Yeah.